Good morning, everyone, or good evening, wherever you might be joining us from. My name is Matt Cornwell. I'm the Associate Director for Student Services at RIT's Saunders College of Business. And we're really excited today to bring you a webinar surrounding global supply chain management and the uncertainty within that business entity, right? And all the things that go into that. So today we have a couple folks joining us. The program director for global supply chain management, Dr. Rich DeJordy. Before I turn it over to Rich and our speaker, Tracy, I just want to lay a couple ground rules with respect to the Q&A function within Zoom and closed captioning. So if you do have the need for captioning services, please feel free to put that into place right at the bottom of your Zoom screen. It's under the More tab, and then just click Captions, and you should be able to see that. And then for Q&A, please use that Q&A function. We definitely want you to ask any questions that you have. So please log those right there, and we'll work through those as we progress through the session. But without further ado, we'll get this started, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Rich DeJordy.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, everyone. Particularly Tracy. Thank you, Tracy Peglowski. Thank you for being here and sharing your professional experience and knowledge about the subject with us. And welcome to participants. Thank you for coming. This is hopefully going to be a very interview style, but somewhat informal. So we're going to conduct it more or less like an interview. But as we're talking, if any questions come up, don't feel like you have to wait till the end to ask questions. By all means, just put them into the Q&A at the time. Matt and I will try to integrate them into the interview to the best of our ability when we're doing that. And of course, we will leave time at the end for any questions that didn't sort of work in there or that come up towards the end. So now, just to get started, I'd like to just have Tracy introduce himself and tell us a little bit about himself, his background, and his career development, and ending sort of with what he's currently doing, what his current role is, and how fun that is.
Well, thank you, Rich. I really appreciate being invited to be here. As they said, Tracy Peglowski, I'll give you my current title and then work to how I got to it. I'm currently the manager of the S&OP process at a company called GW Lisk in Clifton Springs. And we serve the aerospace, automotive, industrial, almost every business. We're a engineered solutions provider for solenoids, flame arresters, and different types of devices. A little bit of my background. My undergrad is in industrial engineering from the University of Buffalo. I also have a master's in finance, an MBA in finance from University of Rochester. And then I started my career path by having the same thing that most people would have. I had a goal to become president of a company by the time I was 40 years old. You know, everybody wants to strive for the peak. Well, I missed by about 4 years. I've worked in a bunch of companies, but what some people would call the peak in my career, I was managing director of a company called Schlegel Far East. They did conductive gasketing for the computer industry and stuff. And I was had full P&L for 3 plants, one in Rochester, New York, one in Gestel, Belgium, and one in Taochuai, China. When reaching that goal, I found out it wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. The politics and all of it with it, I decided at that point I wanted to repurpose myself. My purpose in life is to try to help make people's lives easier. I like to fix things. So I departed from that. I went and got my Lean Six Sigma black belt for continuous improvement. Went through quite a few years of just going into companies, fixing problems and leaving. And eventually, about 20 years ago, one of my old basketball coaches from years ago got me into supply chain. And that I wish I had known about when I was going to college, because they didn't have those programs back then. And for the last 20 years, I've been the director of supply chain at a couple different companies. Most recently, Gorbel, material handling device systems manufacturer, and Victor. but then settled in right now where I am driving the sales and operations planning, which is long range, forward looking, trying to identify risks, set companies up for success. And that's where I am currently, trying to bring S&OP to Lisk globally. As a matter of fact, last week I was in Ireland setting up their plant. I joined into the global S&OP process for Lisk itself.
I like how you snuck in sales and operations planning to elaborate the S&OP, because I was going to ask, but just to be sure. So that sounds great. You got you're in a larger company, you get to travel for setting up new plants and things like that. That seems interesting. I guess one of the things I'd like to sort of start with, I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with supply chain. When I came to RIT, which was only a little more than a year ago, it was sort of new to me to have supply chain associated with the management department, which is where I am. So I guess I'd like you to start talking about some of the misconceptions about a career in supply chain management. Can you talk about sort of some of the most common questions and or myths that you hear about what it is to be a supply chain management professional? What do you do or what don't you do that people think you do, that you've encountered? And of course, what the truth really is, because I think that would be very helpful.
Well, the truth is what you want to make it almost in supply chain. I think we can all agree on that. But I have a handful of missed questions. One of the things I failed to mention during my career path is that I am also an adjunct professor at RIT. I've done the introduction to operations and sales management. I've also done the capstone class. I am also director of education for the local chapter of ASCM and teach CSCP, certified supply chain professional, and CPIM, certified in production and inventory management. So that helps tie it in together. So I noted 6 of them. I'm going to go through them rather quickly. First off, people think supply chain is all about purchasing, and it's not. Supply chain is a holistic view from cradle to grave, how we serve our customers. Okay. In Europe, it's a little different than it is in the US. In US, it's everything outside of, finance and engineering. It's, relationships upstream to downstream, setting up your supply chain. I should reference the SCORE model, supply chain operations research. It's a concept that was developed through ASCM. And it has a nice model where it really encompasses the flow of material through a business. And it starts with planning. How do you plan up front to make the product? Going into sourcing. This is where procurement comes in. It's sourcing, make. Again, in Europe, it is more officially considered part of supply chain. In the US, it's considered operations, but supply chain completely envelops the make, delivery, and return, and then enabling everybody within the process to do it. So it's not just purchasing. It's not just buying stuff. There's a whole world about it. In a bunch of companies, I was director of supply chain at Corbel. I had procurement, I had planning, I had logistics. It's all about getting the stuff in to get the value, the value proposition that a company has, supporting them for success, and then delivering it to the customer. Another one is people say it's not a viable career path. I would say quite the opposite. I think it actually sets people up for a better opportunity to lead companies because it's not siloed. It's not contained. It touches on finance. It touches on engineering. It touches on your company's core competencies, which is what you need to build upon and satisfy the customer's value proposition. If anything, I think it becomes more a better ladder for the future CEOs, even CFOs, COOs, because it's not contained with one. Again, I came out of college and I was an engineer. I was an engineer because I had the best math and science scores in my high school. I didn't even know what an engineer was supposed to do. but I became one and then found out how restricted it was. Supply chain just gets you there. Supply chain is all about experience and intuition. Experience and intuition are absolutely critical factors in anyone's career. But what, again, I like about being able to teach it through ASCM and through RIT is that we give you the tools to understand what the right experiences should be and where the intuition should come from. Because it's when we talk about risk management later, and we're going to get into the topic, it's everywhere. And you've got to understand the right places to look for how they impact your particular supply chain. You could drive yourself crazy looking at everything. I mean, yesterday, the Francis Scott Key Bridge, that's going to impact everybody's supply chain to a certain degree. But if you're an automotive, because Baltimore's port is one of the biggest automotive importing points, and if you're in your coal, it's also one of the biggest exporting points for coal. But if you're not in either of those two, it's going to impact you less. So having a focus on supply chain management and understanding your supply chain gives you the ability to focus a little better. I love the next one. My supply chain is unique. Everyone thinks that their supply chain is unique. But I referenced the SCORE model earlier of plan, source, make, deliver, return, enable. Everybody does all of those. So one of the greatest things that's happened in my career is I've worked at 14 different companies. Most people would call that a pink flag. I call that something that has helped me give you a better perspective, because the planning, whether I'm making aerospace or bread, you still have to have a plan. And so the chain isn't unique. You will have your core competencies that the company can leverage. But outside of that, you can learn from different. I've leveraged things from ceramics into aerospace because the processes are consistent. Razor thin inventories are always better in this day of financial drive and getting your working capital to the, we want to drive to our shareholders and all of that. Razor thin inventories aren't better. Optimized inventory levels are where you should be. You need to understand the cost of failing to meet the customer's expectations versus the cost of holding stuff. And so don't drive to drive the cost out of it and only carry the bare minimum, because some point, and that's what I do with the S&OP. I'm trying to predict where we're going and put the right inventory in place to satisfy the customer at the right time, at the right value proposition.
We may have a
Supply
little
chain should. What's that, Rich?
I'm sorry, we had a little glitch. So could you just start over this last point?
Say in the last, supply chain should always reduce costs. No. Supply chain should optimize costs. Sometimes if the value proposition to the customer is a better one, we are not the lowest cost. I'll take a new example, Gorbel. Gorbel's market value proposition was that they could supply engineered material handling systems, custom designed on a Monday. We'd ship the kit on Friday. Lead time was the value proposition. It wasn't about reducing costs. It was about meeting the customer's need when they needed it. They were not the lowest cost producer. They were the market leader. Their market share was, I can't share because of confidentiality, but it was by far the leader in the world, yet it wasn't driven on cost. It was about optimizing the supply chain to meet that value proposition. So that's a handful of them, Rich. I could probably go on for another 40 minutes on just those, but
that's great. No, I always, it was one of my favorite questions to sort of ask because, here at RIT, a lot of students do co-ops and whatnot. And one of the biggest benefits of that, and I was at Northeastern for a while, is the real sort of like, I don't want to say shock, but surprise that some people feel when they get into a field. So, you know, we had these people that would be accounting majors and they go do their first co-op as an accountant and come back and say, what can I change my major to? Because they just didn't want to do it anymore. Or they were like, this is so great. I'm really happy. But having that real experience, so I like to always sort of get that curtain pulled back a little bit about what people might think versus what they don't do. And I'm so glad that you brought up the Key Bridge, because I was thinking about it yesterday when I was looking at watching the videos of it and, you know, reading about it. I'm like, oh my, this is going to have implications. And so I'm going to sort of, I think we can use that to sort of segue into, you know, the title of the talk is about sort of managing an uncertain world. You know, it wasn't on anyone's card that sometime this week that bridge would collapse. So it's really about, I think a lot of it is about mitigating risk. I think we're all aware of things like COVID, and then, you know, the ever-given blockage of the Suez Canal, and now this bridge collapsing probably on a smaller scale, except for those two industries. But risk comes in all sorts of other areas, right? I was reading last night about the Houthi pirates attacking ships in in and around the Red Sea, which I believe is a fairly busy transportation channel. So it occurred to me that this might have significant implications for the supply chain. So I'm just wondering, is that true? And if you're seeing effects from things like that, or too early to see from the Key Bridge, but from sort of the transportation through the Red Sea channels. And can you discuss what this means sort of from a professional perspective?
Well, especially in the current function that I'm in for sales and operations planning, I'm trying to look forward and forecast where we're going to be in the next 6 to 12 months. And you've got to understand, you know, all the geopolitical tensions, the war in Ukraine, you know, well, everything. The other day I was reading an article about Easter, right? We're coming across the second highest retail holiday ever. You know, Christmas comes first, Easter's number two, and what's going on with chocolate, right? The yields in the South American, they're at historic lows, and the channels to get them through. So that doesn't impact me professionally, but it certainly impacts me personally because I love chocolate. I go back and I look at coming out of COVID, what was one of the biggest issues coming out? Semiconductors. Now, I never thought semiconductors would impact my business here at Lisk because we don't use them, but our biggest customer is Volvo. And their supply chain was constrained by the semiconductor shortage, so they couldn't meet their customer demand. Therefore, my demand profile went down because they were giving me forecasts that I was trying to drive the demand signals through this business. And I had to take those things into account. So absolutely. And then the key becomes, and this is my somewhat pitch for the supply chain education, is knowing to look at each of those risks and identify, because one of my favorite mantras right now, and I do this when I'm teaching for both RIT and for ASCM, is that it's not company versus company anymore. It's supply chain versus supply chain. Or I actually like supply web versus supply web because it's so integrated that, you know, the semiconductor shortage wouldn't have even come to my mind until I understood that dynamic of how it would come through us through not only the automotive, but the aerospace side where they were being used. And right now, a classic one for Lisk is we sell LVDTs to Airbus and Boeing. And we all know what's going on with Boeing right now. It's absolutely, you know, the CEO is going to retire at the end of the year. Spirit, the provider of the door that fell off in Alaska for Alaska Airlines. I'm trying to put it the right way. Risk is everywhere. We need to be aware of it. And sometimes even I'm not aware of how it's going to impact me until it does.
Yeah. Well, and just so I'm go off the script a little bit here, but when I think about things like the Boeing issues, we'll call them, and things like the door plug and whatnot, supply chain isn't everything, right? Some of this is actual, human error or faulty something else. So the supply chain can work to mitigate the risk, but it can't eliminate it. And so I guess that sort of brings up the next part. You mentioned, before I go on to the next part, you sort of mentioned being aware of sort of like the geopolitical tensions, and of course, there's always tensions. You got the war in Ukraine, you have the situation in the Middle East, you got these pirates, which are part of that. I guess to be a supply chain professional, do you have to also be like a political savant, or what do you, to what extent is it seems like you have to have a very good sense of the world news, of the world, dynamics to really do that planning part of it.
Absolutely. You say political savant, I call it gypsy fortune telling.
Okay.
Because it's the same thing. It's understanding. When I drive in the morning, I'm listening to CNBC. When I leave at night, I'm listening to CNBC to understand the politicals and the financials and the impacts. And again, I'm 40 years of experience and I can still be surprised. So risk is everywhere. You're trying to and look at how much more focused risk management is now since COVID. Right. We just experienced a 100-year event of a global pandemic. And right now, coming out of it, the first industry I would have liked to been in is business continuity insurance, right? Because it helps drive. So if I was in that, could I have predicted that? But now how can I leverage it coming out of it?
Right.
And that becomes in essence, the sales and operations planning that I'm guiding through Lisk right now, understanding the impacts and the signals and then how to come out of it with an understanding of almost being a geopolitical savant, but also if you understand your entire supply chain from cradle to grave, you can see also where it may double back on itself, where it may be impacted through other aspects and stuff like that. So I wish I had that crystal ball that I could predict everything, but being very alert to not just, we go back 50 years ago, all we weren't global. We were sitting around in Rochester, New York, and 50 years ago, I was 13. I was looking forward to my summer vacation, but everything was around the area. The moment we went global and we started moving things to the Far East and India, and you had to become aware.
Yeah. It's interesting because in my prior life, before I went and got my PhD and became an academic, I was in information technology. And we talk about things like that, like, redundancy in our networks and stuff like that to make sure that, everything in process. But my last employment job, the last job as an employee, was as director of information technology for the Boston Globe. And one of the things that I had come out of my MBA and I was shocked that they had this warehouse full of newsprint, like months and months worth of newsprint. And I'm like, we just learned all about, just-in-time inventory management. Why is there so much thing? But when you think about it, a newspaper can't exist without newsprint, right? You can't go one day without it. And so the risk management was, no, this footprint is worth keeping the inventory levels higher, to prevent, because the risk is so high. So I mean, it sort of was my first introduction to the concept of that kind of risk management. And it really it leads on to the next question, which is that sort of thing, and that, and it's really based in history. Crystal balls are really good at looking at the past, and so one day they ran out of newsprint, and never will they run out of newsprint again. But looking around in the future, it's really interesting to try to understand how complex and intertwined this global economy is. Do you? It seems impossible of a task to sort of keep track of all those variables. So through our programs here, or through like ASCM, which for those who may not know, ASCM, I think it's the Association of Supply Chain Management. So it's a professional organization for the field. For the certifications and whatnot, we have a question in the Q&A about the comparisons between the US version, the ASCM version, and something called CIPS Level 5, which you probably know what it means, but I don't, from someone from the UK has that. So how is it that you manage that information? How do you know what to focus on and how to predict which variables are most important, I guess, maybe for your not unique, but somewhat unique supply chain? How do you get that knowledge?
That when we asked earlier about experience and intuition, you come in and you learn. Okay, when I walked into Gorbel, I didn't understand what the value proposition was in the flow through. One of the challenges there was to come up with a model to predict what was going to happen in the market. We came across a very nice leading indicator of the Dow Jones Industrial Average. And the drop down through from, the spending at that level, the business levels, and coming back down through, and how they would filter back down and then drive my business demands. So finding a leading indicator helps. The risk side of it, again, Rich, I don't have the silver spoon in that. I don't have the crystal ball. It's then understanding the learning what the demographics, what's the government going to do from an infrastructure point of view? So are we going to build more plants so I can look at the demands? The risk profile, you just talked about the printers. We talked about razor thin inventories. The same thing here is the demand. The only thing I can tell you is forecasts are always wrong. Demand is always different. Everything comes, you have to make your best educated guess. And most supply chains, I say, they're not unique, but they'll have unique aspects that only if you've been in them for a little bit will you understand and can guide. So there's no silver bullet to it. I wish there was, but looking at that and saying, you go through some of the things that you'll learn at RIT, and you do a risk management register. These are the risks that we think we're going to see. This is what we could do to eliminate them. This is what we could do to respond to them, and putting value propositions or value equations, risk management calculations in place. How often is this a pandemic? Once every 100 years. So I got low probability, the impact's high. Should I do some remediation, or do I just respond to it? And that's become a big part. It's part of the class that I teach at RIT and through ASCM.
Yeah. So, and it sounds like, and I'm learning here myself, it sounds like part of the equation, I want to get back to sort of the unique part, the unique / non-unique parts. Part of the equation is to sort of factor out the things and do sort of a cost, for lack of a better term, a cost benefit analysis of trying to mitigate it. So for the newspapers, the cost of actually keeping, 3 weeks worth of newsprint was the floor space and whatever. After that becomes a steady state in terms of cash flow. So that's low once you have it, and was outside of town, so it wasn't expensive. So that seems worth it because the risk is so high. But trying to do everything to prevent against disruption from another pandemic because the probability is so low might be a different sort of calculation. Is that am I getting it sort of right? And then
Absolutely.
And then the thing, and I want to get back to this sort of unique, non-unique thing, because you mentioned when you were talking about the key bridge, these two industries, right? So coal and automotive are going to have much more of an impact to their supply chain disruption as a result of that bridge than a lot of other industries, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And so it's, of course, those all affect other industries, right? So coal is going to affect a whole bunch of different stuff, more different regions, differently, all that. So again, I guess one of the questions that I think is just sort of so intriguing about that is trying to model all this complexity. I don't think I do it in my head. I assume that there are tools and systems that help us do that to really take into account understanding if I pull this thread, what's going to happen on that other end.
Yeah, and that's that risk management register I talked about. You go through for the engineers in the world, you do FMEAs, failure mode elemental analysis. Being an engineer by undergrad, I understand it. You do the same thing with your supply chain. You look at what could happen, especially going global. It becomes, I said, of course, automotive and coal will probably be the biggest for the Francis Scott Key Bridge, but anybody that has anything coming in through those ports is going to be impacted. And one of the biggest things that, back in the 90s and the 2000s, when people were offshoring, people are understanding those risks even more. And one of the things that happened because of COVID and the container ships in the Pacific and all of that, people are now back to nearshoring because the risks became too high.
Sure.
Back then, when it was financial and the costs were 1/10 of what the rest of the world was providing, made sense. My wife ordered castings. She worked for a company in Leroy, New York, and she'd order castings in from China, and they were 25% of the cost of the US back then. She could buy 3 times as much for less and protect herself at the same time. So again, it's that formula of, I want to do the things that optimize my profitability, because again, all companies are in it to make money. We're not all philanthropic organizations. So we want to do that, and we'll do it. Now, as the risk increases because of the global political tensions and stuff, we are seeing a change back to the nearshoring, and even we at Lisk, we were buying some things in South America. Now we're bringing them back in where it makes sense. And that's where I said up front, not about reducing costs, but optimizing costs. And risk becomes part of it. And your risk profile becomes part of it too. I mean, if you're I'm not risk adverse. I don't think I'm very risk taking either. But as you're going through and evaluating it, it becomes part of, how you view it and how you're going to handle it from a fiduciary point of view.
So at the risk of going completely off script, because you said something that really intrigued me,
Please.
you were talking about not being philanthropic organizations, but of course, supply chain management matters to humanitarian aid organizations and things like that, like being able to get aid places. There's I think I read something last week about, building a strip near Gaza to try to be able to deliver aid because there was no way to get there because the supply chains were being disrupted. And so this is really a universal phenomenon, no matter what kind of organization. Anytime you have an organization, it seems like there's going to be some level of supply chain, even if the supply chain is, and I don't want to say only, but if the supply chain is almost entirely around human resources, there's still a supply chain about getting the people, getting the training, and all that sort of stuff. So it sort of intrigued me. I don't know, are there any special considerations or anything special about sort of, if it's not about a for-profit company, but more about some sort of international aid organization or something like that? Are there special considerations or special dispensations that are just, it works the same?
No, to your point, aid relief, FMEA, all of that, the supply chain is completely different. It's about making relationships with local entities that can support you at a moment's notice versus the stability that we in manufacturing would like to have from a supply chain of giving them nice steady signals and they can optimize their costs. costs kind of go out the window when you're looking at federal, FMEA, emergency,
Right.
stuff like that. And therefore you need to have, there's in teaching supply chain, there's efficient and there's reactive, right? Efficient is manufacturing, trying to drive at a constant tact or rhythm or pace. The reactive is when something happens, I need to be there to help,
So
or even, go ahead, Rich.
no, or even
Yeah, and so it becomes, and I say there's two, efficient and reactive, but there's never one that's completely efficient or completely reactive. There's always a blend across. And when we get into the difference, supply chain really focused on product in its beginning, right? Manufacturing. Services are a supply chain in and of themselves, and there is no product. It's the service that we're providing, banks, waiters, restaurants, food. It becomes a different dynamic.
I'm sort of fascinated by the story of Gander in Newfoundland. On 9/11, they sort of brought in all the planes, what it was, 39 planes or something. And then, the way the community sort of just created new manufacturing processes to feed, double the people that they had in the community and whatnot. It's just sort of, it's a sort of heartwarming story, but it's also sort of like from a supply chain management story. It's like, that's the reactive side, right? And so it seems to me that the way you just broke it down was that the efficient side is about planning to mitigate risk, and then the reactive side is those things we didn't plan for, being prepared to deal with the things that we didn't prepare for, which is really kind of paradoxical, but very cool. Okay, I have one sort of major more question, and then we'll make sure we leave time for everyone to open up questions in there. And that is sort of, we talked, a lot of stuff has sort of been much more global and macro in nature, through the pirates and bridges collapsing and blocking the canals. But I have to imagine that there are small things that can have an outsized difference in the world. And so I'm just curious if you have some story from your experience about either something that seemed like it might be more minor, but that had this huge impact, either positive or negative, like something that a tweak here that made a huge positive difference or screwed everything up on business operations. Do you have I don't know if you do or not, but so you're sort of a little things make a big difference story.
It's not a little thing, but it's one I think needs some focus, more focus. Most companies run on ERP systems, right?
Mm-hmm.
They've got an ERP process in place. One of the things that happens, unfortunately, is companies put an ERP system in, and there's a little known certification called Class A ERP. A gentleman by the name of Don Sheldon created it years ago, and it's about finding the right balance between your ERP system and the idiosyncrasies or the core competencies of a company. Most people, it's same with that, my supply chain's unique philosophy.
Yeah.
That people don't understand that ERP is the most powerful equipment, machine thing that they have in their business. And if you attack it the right way, if you put it in, and we go through the education, and an ERP system should cover 80 to 85% of your stuff. And this is a journey we're doing at Lisk currently, where we were unique. We're an engineered solution, so we customized over half of it. Okay, that raises inefficiencies. When you go into a company and you're a supply chain person, focus on the foundations, right? When I was at Gorbel, we were at X dollars of revenue, and I had 4 schedulers and 2 planners. We focused on the foundation. We set the models correctly. We got the data integrity. Data management is huge. We know that now. When I left Gorbel, they were 3 times the size, and we did it with 2 schedulers and 1 planner. A 50% reduction in manpower when we tripled the business size. And these are rough approximations. Understanding that is key, because everybody focuses on the risk, and they should, from the demand signal itself, but having the best foundation that you can with your business will set you up to be, to what we talked about earlier, Rich, both efficient and reactive. And a lot of people miss that when they're putting in their ERP systems. I don't know if that qualifies as a simple thing, but it's a pitch for making sure your foundation is solid.
Well, comparatively to, you know, bridges collapsing, it is a simple thing. So I think that qualifies in there. I just want to go back because we did have this question, and we're going to turn it open it up to more questions. I'll give you one last open-ended question while we wait for people to mull on questions. But I just want to make sure I get this one because I'm not sure. I sort of alluded to it, but I don't know if I got a direct answer. So this person says, I've been working in supply chain for about 8 years before coming for my MBA here. I started my career as project controls and risk management professional. However, when I applied for a supply chain role here in the United States, most companies request supply chain certifications. Although I have the CIPS level 5 from the UK, would you advise another certification here in the United States to give me an edge?
Well, first off, you should go to RIT for supply chain management.
And ASCM for CPM. I wrote down CFPM.
I currently am an instructor. I'm a certified instructor for ASCM, and I teach the CPIM and the CSCP, certified in production and inventory management, certified supply chain professional. I'm actually going in right now to get my CLTD in logistics and transportation and distribution. And there's a new one by ASCM. It's the CTSC, certified in transformation of the supply chain. It's got the continuous improvement. I certainly recommend, as a matter of fact, Lisk is so forward focused in that respect. I just did, and I volunteered my time to do it. I put our entire procurement group through the CSCP. And the first person just took his test last week and got his certifications. I'm a creature. My passion is learning. So yes, I recommend certifications. I recommend going to institutes like RIT that, you know, have a good, solid supply chain program. I am not as familiar with the British, you know, you said CIA, whatever it was, level 5. I'm not familiar with that. But anything that helps you expand your skill set, not just from a value point for the business, but from your own personal point of view, you become a more valuable commodity, you know, and that helps. The more education we have, the better. I don't know if that exactly answered that, Rich, but, you know, CPIM, CSCP, just getting out there. It's like when I went to college, I became an engineer. When I came out of it, I was an engineer for exactly 2 years, and then they moved me into product management. But what it shows is the capability, the ability to learn and understand more than it means that I've learned this particular thing. It's that
Yeah,
I can get it. I can grasp the concepts.
this is sort of, you know, higher education is facing a lot of sort of turbulence and various things. And the combination of showing the especially like a master's program, showing the focused investment in a particular area, and then a sort of certification that's more of a professional sanctioned, you know, professional society sanctioned one, is a really good, I think, a really good combination. We do have another question, which I may even be able to answer, surprisingly. And
I'll let you answer it
I'm going to
then,
try,
Rich.
and then you correct me if I'm wrong, which is what is the difference between ERP and SAP? And I believe ERP stands for Enterprise Resource Planning Systems, of which SAP is one, maybe the most popular, or one of the most popular instantiations of that, right? It's an example of an ERP. ERP is a generic term. SAP is one product. I feel accomplished.
Rich, it's all yours. It's all yours, Rich.
So we don't have any other questions right now. Oh, no, I take that back. The question is, how effectively supply chain increases the profitability of IT companies? So I'm going to reframe it a little bit, and please correct me if I'm doing it wrong. How, you know, to what extent can something like supply chain efficiency help the profitability of a company in the IT industry? Do you have any? I mean, I don't think you've worked in that particular industry, but
I haven't, so I'm going to generalize my answer a little bit here. But what it is every business has a core competency, right? That's what they're in.
nope. I think we have a slight glitch.
Might have
But-
lost my connection here. I did for a
You
second.
came back, so every business has a core competency.
Yeah, every business has a core competency and they need to understand what it is. And supply chain helps you identify that. You know, and whether it's IT or a food cart in Times Square in New York, they've got a core competency. They're making food at that point for the people there. IT is doing it, and believe me, I'm a data guy. I love IT and data. So by having a supply chain and understanding the core competency, how our customers value it, what's the value proposition to our customers, and then what's it mean upstream, and how do we get the right supply chain? I said earlier, it's not company versus company anymore. It's supply chain versus supply chain. So your partnerships matter. And whether it's IT, automotive, aerospace, services, that helps you optimize. So again, can't answer specifically from an IT point of view, but can look at it from a global perspective of 20,000 foot. And by having a supply chain focus, you're not just focusing, quite honestly, on just IT or on just engineering or on just this. It's allowing us to cross those boundaries.
Yeah. So we have a comment, and I'm going to read this, and maybe I'm not quite sure it's a question, but it says every other company uses SAP, which is certainly very popular, and also upgrading simultaneously. For example, from SAP R3 to S4 HANA, maybe they name them, sort of thing. And so I'm not sure if there's a question there, and if there is, could you maybe rephrase it? But I guess one of the questions is that I would have is something like SAP, which is very popular. My understanding of it, and I'm an IT guy, so I have some exposure here, is that it gives you a framework, a shell, and then you, in your own organization, you sort of customize it in many ways to focus on your businesses and your core competency. So it's sort of a platform on which you implement your supply chain management and your enterprise resource planning thing. So even if two companies are using SAP, the same version, they might use it in very different ways because of the nature of the beast that each of those companies is. And therefore, it's not like an equalizer. It can actually be used as a competitive advantage in two different places. Is that fair?
Yeah. The company I came from or was with, Gorbal, used Sightline.
Okay.
Lisk uses Sightline. They're an N4 product. Same basic concepts, but you're absolutely right, Rich. You customize it to represent the value propositions, the core competencies that each business has. Here at Lisk, because we take orders in, but we're an engineered solution, but we design a product, and then we have a long bill of material that we have to build from. We don't cross-link our customer orders directly to our jobs. Gorbal, because they were a custom shop, everything was unique. Custom orders were cross-linked immediately to jobs, and jobs run through. So same basic shell, but the customizations are different. That's where an ERP system, if you set it up correctly, they should cover 80 to 85% of what you do. And then you have to layer on those customizations that do it. The problem that a lot of companies have is they think they are a unique supply chain and they customize 50%. Right. And that's where this Class A ERP certification comes into place, is knowing that isn't a unique process. I can use the standard out of the box. It's going to be easier. And only customizing what you need to do, it hits that sweet spot. Excuse me. And that's what I was trying to pontificate on earlier was finding that right sweet spot, because the most valuable tool you'll have. SAP is wonderful. I put in SAP. I put in JD Edwards, Oracle. I put in Sightline. I've worked with mom and pop little packages of ERP. It's you got to find the right package and then modify it appropriately. It's like the three bears, right? Not too much, not too little, just right.
The Goldilocks, I use that often in various things, but as you were just talking about finding that sweet spot, it was making me think of the Einstein quote, everything should be made as simple as possible, but no simpler. So I should use as much out of the box as I can, but no more. Right? And so it's sort of that same philosophy
Absolutely.
about, just finding that right balance. We do have another question. With your experience, what are some emerging trends or technologies that are shaping the future of supply chain management? Oh, that's a great question. I wish I had thought of that question.
Well, the first genie out of the box obviously is AI, right? That's huge. You can go in and it exhilarates me and scares the crap out of me because of where it is. Data is supposed to drive. One of the mantras of supply chain is information versus inventory in getting the data flowing through. And so with AI coming in, we have to be careful. When I listen to ChatGPT, I got that on my phone and I'm understanding the source of the data and the validity of it. I think it's going to be a huge benefit, but we also have to make sure we have to have the right controls in place. The other thing, and this struck me while coming home from Ireland. I'm a data guy. I do want big data. I want to replace data. I want to replace inventory with information. I want to have the data flows, but we've got to hit the right balance. I don't want the dehumanization of the supply chain either. And I had I got delayed at JFK Friday night coming home. And I haven't traveled in about 4 or 5 years because I wanted to get out of it. And I walked into a sports bar and I sat and I waited for a waiter and waited and waited until I saw the QR code on the table to order. So finally I caught on to the technology and I hit the QR code and I ordered my cheeseburger and I ordered my my beer, and girl came over and delivered it, disappeared. I wanted a second beer, my flight got delayed, all of that. But then a waiter came over and he was cleaning tables and he sat down and we had a conversation. He goes, that absolutely ruined it for the service industry at the airport. Because there's no, I'm a magnanimous tipper. If I like what people are doing. I actually, when I was traveling a lot, I learned a trick from my master black belt. I'd go into a restaurant and I let the waiter or waitress pick my meal because I'm not sensitive to any food. That developing of the relationships, and relationships are foundational to supply chain. This waiter came over and said, I hate this now. I used to get the most tips because I could develop the relationships and do all. And now, because it's just going through the QR code and it's almost on, let's not de-incent that human side of the equation. And it just struck me home because here's the guy that came out of his way. We had the conversation. He goes, we've got waiters that when there's no QR, they're out back on their phone. They don't care. I'm walking around doing all my stuff, and it's almost de-incentivizing. I hope that made sense, but
No,
it struck me on my way home Friday from Ireland.
yeah, no, it is interesting to see, and and those relationships, they're important in supply chain, no matter what it is. You're negotiating that. You think about the waiter, but when Gandor had to take in all these planes, it was the relationships amongst the people in the community, what we would call in some of the research I do, social capital, that allowed that sort of emergent supply chain to just develop for that one-off or 1 week off event.
Yep.
We have time for one last question. There is one here. I don't know that actually. I'm going to wait on that because it's really about applying to the PhD program here, which we do have a PhD program, and this person's applying. But it says, do I need to have a certification in supply chain management to be accepted? Absolutely not. For a PhD program, you would not, here or otherwise. But if you want to follow up with me afterwards, that's fine. And then there was a compliment to your answer to that question. So we don't want to dehumanize things because, in the end, everything happens because of people and because of the relationships between people. That's what really happens. And so I think that that's really a great point to sort of leave it off on. I will give you the last 2 minutes, Tracy, if you have anything else you think our audience should know that hasn't come up yet, or not. So.
One last point then, because I'm on the ASCM side and through RIT, is I like where businesses are going now, but there's a thing called the triple bottom line. And it used to be just profit. But I love the fact that you'll hear sustainability all the time. And the triple bottom line is what I call the 3 Ps: profit, planet, and people. And the responsibility that companies are now taking into a place. I'm from upstate New York, and I'm old enough to remember what was called the Love Canal up in Niagara Falls, where Occidental Chemical dropped all their wastes in and just contaminated the lands. The businesses nowadays are starting to take that in. I love the story of Bombas, where you buy the undergarment and they donate one to the homeless for it. So I'm just through the roof about where things are going that way. And the more companies that understand that it's not just profits, it's also the responsibilities to the community and to our environment that are really going to make things sustainable for my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, and the generations to come. So I just wanted to put one last pitch in for the triple bottom line.
Well, I appreciate that. And, obviously sustainability is a big thing here at RIT. And I think it's also I'm very hopeful about the focus that a lot of incoming students at all levels, undergrad, but also in our graduate programs, have on that. So I think that's really helpful. Okay, well, thank you so much, Tracy. Matt, do we have any closing ceremonies or anything of that nature?
No, I just want to thank Tracy again. This was fantastic. And I'm glad we had a pretty solid turnout here live as well. So really appreciate your time. I learned a lot as well. So I really appreciate that. But we're good. We're good to go. So thank you all for attending. I do have a webinar, an Ask Me Anything style webinar for those interested in applying to any of our graduate programs next Thursday, April 4th. It is in the evening at 5:30 for those folks that, work full time, need that flexibility. So please feel free to join us for that. But otherwise, we are set to go. So thank you again.
Great.
My
Awesome.
pleasure.
Thank you. And
for having me.
And thank you to all the participants, and especially those who ask questions. It's really great when we can drive the content from your questions. So that was just wonderful. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, folks. Have a good day or evening.